Hey everyone, Eric Raging Levine here, back again with another review of cards that have been revealed from Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths, as well as Commander 2020. We did a big one of these yesterday. A lot of cool cards were revealed, and it turns out a lot more cool cards were revealed since I made that video. So we're going to cover every single one of those cards in this video. So let's get started. Oh, before we do, I am, of course, covering these cards from a perspective of a social Commander player. I like to have long games where lots of cards get played and everybody gets to at least try to do their thing to some degree. I'm not a big CEDH person. I don't play a lot of it, but you know, I don't have a problem with it. It's just that that's not what my content covers. So my decks tend to fall into like the 5 to 6 range on the command zone scale. So let's check out the new cards from, well, mostly Ikoria. We're starting off with Dirge Magistrate, 1 and a white for a 1/3. Human Wizard. Your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hand. So this locks out things like graveyard casting, casting cards from exile, casting cards from, oh, I don't know, the command zone. So right off the bat, people have been a little bit up in arms about this one. People are a little concerned that this just locks people out of casting their commanders, and that's not a lot of fun. You should play spot removal. Every color has it. Red's got Burn. Green's got cards like Song of the Dryads, Beast Within, Creatures with Fight, cards that make things fight. White's got Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, any number of things, Wraths. Black has all the spot removal you could possibly ask for. Even blue has Reality Shift, Pongify, Rapid Hybridization, Curse of the Swine. There are so many ways to blow up Dirge Magistrate, counter it, put your opponent into a situation where they need to block with it, things like that. This card will die. And it will die because you spend resources to kill it, or someone else at the table does. And that's fine, because at the end of the day, your opponent played a 1/3 creature. And ideally, your deck functions on some level, even when its commander isn't in play. So there are two lessons here, really. The first one is, if you're building a deck that functions only when the commander is in play, be prepared to accept the consequences of that, which is basically sometimes you don't get to do your thing. Sometimes you get entirely locked out of your thing when a card like Dirge Magistrate gets played, or if it just gets killed or countered or whatever too much and you just don't have the mana for it. But the second and more important lesson, I always talk about playing graveyard removal. Graveyard heat's really important, but so is spot removal. Everybody needs it. Everybody has access to it, and you're not playing enough of it. I can almost guarantee you. I don't play enough of it. Nobody does. But this card's not an issue. Like, don't go on the internet and ask people to ban this card. It shouldn't be banned. It's not necessary. It's a 1/3. You can lightning bolt it. Come on. Next up, we have Flourishing Fox. 1/1 for a single white. It's a fox with cycling for just 1 mana. Whenever you cycle another card, put a +1/+1 counter on Flourishing Fox. Now, maybe this could play in a dedicated cycling deck. You could put it in a Gavi Nest Warden deck, but I think cycling 1 might just be the best part of this card, because unless you are really cycling multiple times every turn cycle, this is going to grow pretty slowly, and outside of cycling, it's going to be a bad top deck. Methos of Snapdax. That's a mouthful. 2 and 2 white for a sorcery. Each player, wow, that's a lot of words, chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control, then sacrifices the rest. That's already reminiscent of a lot of effects, but let's keep going. If a black and a red were spent to cast this spell, you choose the permanents for each player instead. Now, there's this cycle of Mythos cards, and I've heard feedback about these cards that the wording maybe is a little unclear at first blush, so let me try to clarify things. You don't get to just pay a black and a red to cast this spell as some kind of weird, more powerful alternate cost. What the game is asking you to do here is pay black, red, white, white for this spell. And if you do, you're going to get the extra, not kicker, but the extra effect here, where you get to make the choices for your opponents instead of them making the choices, if that makes sense. So you're going to be sort of winnowing down the availability of non-land permanents in play in kind of a Cataclysm type way, except not lands, because this card is more interested in the game being fun afterwards. Making the choices is not always necessary if you're already going a lot bigger than your opponents, but if you are facing opponents who have big creatures, maybe bigger creatures than you, maybe they're playing multiple planeswalkers, maybe they're focused on going wide angle with artifacts or enchantments, this can be a good way to winnow them down to something that doesn't really help them. If you're playing actual snap decks, you're going to want to keep your big old mutant snap decks and leave your opponents with, you know, some garbage creatures that they just happen to still have on the battlefield. You can even give them creatures with cards like Forbidden Orchard, and there's ways to give your opponents artifacts, enchantments. There's ways that you can give your opponents cards, or tokens even, that then you'll choose for them to keep. And that might be one of the fun ways, if not necessarily the most powerful, but a fun way to play Methos of Snap decks. Next up, we have Savai Sabretooth, 1 and a white for a 3/1 cat. This is a 3/1 cat. I don't know what you'd do with it, unless you want to play all the 3/1 cats, but there's others. It's probably fine. You don't need this, most likely. It's cool. Cool art. Next up, we have Valiant Rescuer, a 1 and a white for a 3/1 human soldier with cycling 2. Whenever you cycle another card for the first time each turn, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Now, Flourishing Fox, which we saw earlier, grew every time you cycled, but this one will only give you a single 1/1 per turn. That is a little bit limiting. It's not really going to be cycling's answer to Monastery Mentor. It's an okay payoff. It's a solid payoff. You know, if you're playing Gavi, you have Gavi in play, Gavi Nest Warden I talked about earlier. You'll get your 2/2 Dinosaur Cat and your 1/1 Human Soldier. Alongside Gavi, it looks like a pretty decent payoff, but by itself, it's not, you know, it's not an enormous advantage, but it adds up over time. Next up, we have Boon of the Wishgiver, 4 blue for a sorcery with cycling 1. Draw 4 cards. Now, obviously, we have cards like Opportunity or Into the Story that kind of outshine this because they are instants and not sorceries, but this having cycling 1 is probably the best part of this card, quite honestly. I don't see myself wanting to play Boon of the Wishgiver over either of the cards I already mentioned unless the cycling is really relevant. Next up, we have Dreamtail Heron, 4 and a blue for a 3/4 elemental bird with mutate 3 and a blue. Flying, and whenever this creature mutates, draw a card. I think this ends up in most blue mutate-focused decks. You're going to be creating like a big nonsense pile of creatures. It's good with Bracos because you're going to be bringing Bracos back from the dead over and over and over again. And if you can have cards like Dreamtail Heron to kind of grease the wheels of that operation a little bit, draw some extra cards, that can be really helpful. Next up is Neutralize, 1 blue, instant counter target spell, cycling 2. Now I know we don't, we try not to play cancel in Commander if we don't have to, right? If you're going deep on counter spells though, I think you could do a lot worse than this specifically because of the cycling. If you're not looking for a reactive option right now, don't be afraid to just aggressively toss this in the bin and draw something. If you're playing like a heavy cycling deck, I think this is going to make the cut. But I think this is a lot better in tournament-focused constructed than it is in Commander. Next up is Phase Dolphin. Now, this is a 1/4 elemental whale for 2 and a blue, so if you're a big sea creature fan, this one might hit what you need. But the ability, whenever Phase Dolphin attacks, another target creature, attacking creature rather, can't be blocked this turn. It's not an amazing thing because Phase Dolphin itself doesn't have evasion like some of the white variants of this card have had in the past, like the flyers that also give other creatures flying when they attack. Phase Dolphin is a 1/4, so it's a little harder to kill in combat, but in Commander, I don't see that outliving the early mid-game very often. I think there are also a lot of better ways to do this in Commander. There are cards like Aqueous Form, you can just play Rogue's Passage. There's cards like Whisper Silk Cloak that make your creatures unblockable. Unless you're adhering to some sort of elemental whale-related theme, I would stray away from Phase Dolphin. Next up, we have Reconnaissance Mission. 2 blue enchantment with cycling 2. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. So, it's the good part of Biden of Thassa, without being legendary and without being an artifact, which are sometimes ups, sometimes downs, and it has cycling. I mean, we've already seen a lot of token-related payoffs in the cycling deck between Gavi and Valiant Rescuer, and I think Reconnaissance Mission fits in really well with those cards, but it also fits in well in any token deck, really, that's playing blue. I think this is going to show up quite a bit, draw a lot of cards, and just look better than Coastal Piracy basically all the time. Wingfold Terran, 5 and a blue. Is it Terran? Paterran? Terran? I think it's Terran. Wingfold Terran, 5 and a blue for a 3/6 dinosaur. Enters the battlefield with your choice of a flying counter or hexproof counter. This is limited fodder unless you're really all in on dinosaur tribal. And even if you are, find something else probably. This card's not great. Blood Curdle, 3 and a black, instant. Destroy target creature. Put a menace counter on a creature you control. Unless you're really into like putting menace on things, unless you're really like focused on menace, which I don't see as being necessarily a thing, you could do a lot better than Blood Curdle. I immediately think of Eat to Extinction. That immediately springs to mind. And black just has so much better, even unconditional spot removal than Blood Curdle. The days of wanting to play cards like Chill to the Bone are long past us. So I wouldn't worry too much about Blood Curdle in Commander. Next up is Call of the Death Dweller, 2 and a black. Return up to 2 target creature cards with total converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a Death Touch counter on either of them, then put a Menace counter on either of them. And it's a sorcery. Okay, so you can get a little value out of this. You could, I guess, loop Eternal Witness with this and the 0-cost creature. Over time, for a very high mana investment, you could do something with that. I'm sure that if you have Eternal Witness and a 0-cost creature and Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar and some kind of payoff for when creatures die or leave your graveyard, you can find a way to make this combo people out in some very confusing circumstance. If you're more competitively minded, you can also get back the Cephalid Breakfast combo, or you could get back Thassa's Oracle and Sacred Guide all at once, but that relies on all those cards already being in the graveyard, and I said I wasn't going to talk about CEDH, so I'm going to leave that to the experts, which is not me. Next up is Tavern Whisperer, 4 and a black for a 4/4, or more likely mutate for 3 and a black. It's got Menace, and whenever this creature mutates, each opponent discards a card. Again, this one has a future in mutate decks due to the each opponent text. If it were just one player discarding a card, this would not be what we were looking for. And I don't think it's a high value mutate card. I think this is very much cuttable, but it's still playable, reducing your opponent's in-hand resources, especially when you're trying to focus on making one big monstrosity creature and extracting a lot of value from that. Reducing the number of cards in your opponent's hands is probably pretty good. Next up is Chittering Harvester, very similar, 5 and a black for a 4/6, but mutate, 4 and a black for a Nightmare. Whenever this creature mutates, each opponent sacrifices a creature. This is even better than your average everybody sacrifices creature because you don't have to sacrifice. Now, you do have to mutate it to get the value. Mutate is looking more and more like a value fest focused on just generating a lot of triggers. You expose yourself to a big blowout once you kind of combine everything. It's important to remember that mutate is a lot like bestow, if you remember bestow from the original Theros, where if you try to mutate onto something and then that creature gets killed or bounced or exiled or what have you, otherwise moves to a place where it can't be mutated onto, you're just going to get your creature. So if you try to mutate with this, and your creature gets killed in response, you're just going to end up with a 4/6. And it hasn't mutated onto anything, so you won't get the sacrifice trigger. Dirge Bat is next. 2 and 2 black for a 3/3 flash flying bat with mutate 4 and 2 black. So remember, the flash does apply to when you're casting it with the mutate cost because you're still just casting the spell. Whenever this creature mutates, destroy target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. So for 6 mana at instant speed, you'd better be getting more than a Hero's Downfall, right? Like, that's not enough. You need to be extracting value over time out of this. You need to be putting this on a creature that also already has, when this creature mutates, do something. which sort of leads me to worry about mutate decks being very samey. Like, you're just going to take all of the cards that say when this creature mutates and just kind of pancake them together into one big deck list / mutate creature, and it's all kind of going to look the same, just different based on your color combination. So while this is probably going to be fun to try out early on, you're just going to take all the cards that say the thing, put them in the deck, put some utility spells in, and go to town. For me, a lot of the fun of Commander is building weird decks and trying to find cool synergies, and Mutate kind of says, no, take as much of this as you can and put it in the pile, and then once you're done with that, then we'll see how much room you have left to do fun stuff, okay? And I don't feel great about that from a deck building perspective, but we'll see. We'll see. Maybe there's enough Mutate stuff that choices will be made, and I don't know. It's hard to say. Next up is Insatiable Hemophage, 3 and a black for a 3/3 Nightmare. Mutate 2 and a black. It's got Death Touch, and whenever this creature mutates, each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. Now, this sort of relies on the creature being around a long time and having a lot of stuff mutated onto it, because if this is the first card you mutate on, you get to hit everybody for 1, and then it goes from there. So you'd have to have a stack of 4 cards fused together in a mutation before you were able to hit your opponents for a total of 6 each. And it feels like you can just do a lot better with cards like, Grey Merchant of Asphodel springs to mind immediately. I just don't think this is good value for card here, and I don't think Death Touch is going to be what you're looking for. You're not going to be leaving some 1/1 mutate card on top. So I wouldn't worry too much about Insatiable Hemophage. I don't think this has a huge future in Commander. This card, however, Methos of Death, 2 and a black for an instant, I think does have a huge future in Commander. And here's why. For 3 mana, you get to destroy target non-land permanent if it's a creature, or if green and white were spent to cast a spell. So you either get Murder for 2 and a black, or Vindicate. Keep in mind, at instant speed for Abzan mana. That's really good. That is a really good piece of spot removal. This is the card you want to be playing in your Abzan decks in one of your spot removal slots. It's just great. It's just a really flexible card. If you are kind of choked on one color of mana and don't have the ability to Vindicate, you can still kill a creature. Now, you can't play it outside of an Abzan deck, but I don't know why you'd want to. There's other options for you. But the idea of an instant speed Vindicate for Abzan Charm mana seems just fantastic. Next up, Methos of Vadrok, 2 and 2 red for a sorcery. Methos of Vadrok deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers. If a white and blue were spent to cast this spell until your next turn, those permanents can't attack or block, and their abilities can't be activated. I don't like this card very much. I'm not impressed by this, especially at sorcery speed, but shutting off planeswalkers could buy you a turn against a Super Friends deck. I guess that's most of the use case for this card. I would just rather blow up a bunch of stuff with Storm's Wrath. I don't see 5 damage divided for 4 mana plus this effect being good in this format. In other formats, this probably does something. Maybe, I'm not even sure, but in Commander, I don't see this being terribly powerful. It just seems like you can get a lot more for 4 mana. Shredded Sails, you can either blow up an artifact or kill a flyer or cycle it for 2, all for just 1 and a red instant. This is, one of those sideboard card shatter variants. I'm not super impressed with this. I like modular cards. This card has 3 different modes, right? It has Destroy Target Artifact, it has Hit a Flyer, it has Draw a Card, but I just don't think any of these are powerful enough. Auspicious Starix, 4 and a green for a 6/6. That's a heck of a stat line. Mutate 5 and a green. Whenever this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile X permanent cards, where X is the number of times this creature is mutated. Put those permanent cards onto the battlefield. So this leaves a ton of value behind for the risk of mutating your creatures into one big monstrosity. This is the kind of mutate payoff that we're looking for. Obviously, this is going to go directly into any Illuna deck for maximum free permanents. And I know the 6/6 stat line isn't the biggest deal. There's plenty of big creatures in Commander, but it's going to be the biggest creature in the pile a decent amount of the time. And just that ability is amazing. Even if you just get to do it once, you still get a free permanent, and hopefully you've stacked your deck with enough good permanents that matters. But mutating onto this a second time, like if you mutate this onto a Luna, and then you mutate something else on, this is just a magnificent amount of value. Auspicious Starks is, depending on your position on whether you're going to be playing with or against the mutate deck, either it's going to be glorious or it's going to be just really frustrating to stare down. This card's amazing. Next up, Colossification, 5 green for an aura, enchant creature. When Colossification enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature. Not something I'm used to seeing on a green aura, but you'll see why in a second. Enchanted creature gets +20/+20. Now, I understand why it has to tap. We don't want people slamming this on 7 and just killing their opponent out of nowhere. That's not something green really wants to be doing. Or, well, I mean, it wants to do that. It's just the Wizards of the Coast RD didn't want that happening. But +20/+20 is a lot. It's almost too much. But in Commander, it's actually not too much because we have 40 life. So going off with Colossification Fling for 9 mana is not actually going to kill your opponent all the time. What I was hoping to figure out is how to sort of cancel this triggered ability, but some of the more obvious options only hit creatures' abilities. So I wonder if people will be able to figure out how to stop the creature from tapping. You could toss this onto a creature that untaps. There are a lot of creatures that untap, cards like Silkbind Fairy. You could use this with Umbral Mantle. I admit I'm going really way onto the fringe here, but this card's just so adorable. I think it's worth getting some story equity out of. Here's Fertilid, 2 and a green for a 0/0 elemental that enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and then you can pay 1 and a green and remove a +1/+1 counter from Fertilid to give target player a rampant growth. Now, this card's a reprint, right? This card's been around, but it is nice to see this card back into focus, especially since Evolution Sage is in recent memory, because Fertilid is insane with Evolution Sage. You play it, you get 2 counters, you remove a +1/+1 counter, you go get your land enters the battlefield, Evolution Sage triggers, you get to proliferate, you continue, you're very, very happy. You can also give other players lands if you're feeling particularly generous, but Fertilid's a great card, and it's absolutely worth checking out, especially in decks that involve +1/+1 counters. Cards like Hardened Scales, cards like Grumgully the Generous all love Fertilid. Next up is Migration Path, another fantastic piece of ramp. 3 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Now, what I've just read you is not the flavor text, the oracle text of Explosive Vegetation. So you'll be surprised to see some extra words down the bottom of Migration Path. Cycling 2? So when I draw this late in the game, and I go, I don't really need Explosive Vegetation right now, but I've drawn it, and now I have this dead card in my hand, I can just cycle it instead. That is an amazing upgrade to this card. It's absolutely an enormous difference. I know just adding cycling to a card doesn't look like a lot, but we were already happy paying 4 mana for this effect, and now we get cycling at no extra charge? That's unreal. This card is fantastic. Upgrade from your Explosive Vegetation, sure, but you can also just play Migration Path and Explosive Vegetation, especially if you don't feel like shelling out for Sky Shroud claims. This card's wonderful. Pick up Migration Path. Do your thing. This card rules. Next up is Back for More. 4, a black and a green, an instant. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. When you do, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So this is an enormous amount of value. Instant speed reanimation. Also causes the creature to fight if you want. And you can do it during combat because it's an instant, so you can bring it back, get an enters the battlefield trigger, fight something, and then block. Imagine doing this with something like a Grave Titan. You get an enormous amount of value. Instant speed reanimation is always a really fantastic thing to have. Makeshift Mannequin never looked this good. Now I know it costs more and is a 2-color card, but still, this card is really strong. I already love cards like Blood for Bones, and this really just does the job. Back for More is fantastic. Absolutely play it. Make sure you bring back something that's big, something that has Death Touch, or at least something that has a good enters the battlefield ability so you don't have to worry about, like, the not fighting. Or fight with the creature, get it back in the graveyard for more shenanigans later. Channeled Force, 2, a blue and a red for an instant. It's an additional cost to cast this spell. Discard X cards. Target player draws X cards. Channeled Force deals X damage to up to one target creature or planeswalker. You're still down a card if you are the person drawing, so you have to make sure you're killing something. If this gets countered, you're out multiple cards, maybe your whole hand. There could be reasons to target another player, go hellbent, you know, make your Ensnaring Bridge do its thing, make other people draw with cards like Nekusar, maybe that's what you want to do, but I feel like there are better ways to do this. Maybe you're trying to activate Madness. This card feels like it's trying to do something cool, but just doesn't necessarily do it. I don't know. It lets you kind of cycle parts of your hand that don't have cycling. I don't see it. I don't see it. I don't think this card's for us. I don't think this card's for Commander. Maybe I'm missing something. If I'm missing something, please let me know. You know, tell me in the comments. You know, be nice, obviously. But I want to know what you want to do with Channeled Force. Please explain this card to me. Help me understand what we could do with this in Commander. Because I'm not seeing a lot of upside here that you can't get better with other cards. Maybe it's the versatility? I don't know. Well, let's move on to a card I do understand. Cheville, Bane of Monsters. Black-green, 1/3 legendary creature, human rogue, Death Touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, if your opponents control no permanents with bounty counters on them, put a bounty counter on target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Whenever a permanent an opponent controls with a bounty counter on it dies, that's a heck of a clause. Whenever a permanent an opponent controls with a bounty counter on it dies, sure, you gain 3 life and draw a card. That seems great. So we just have to make sure that Cheville's bounties die. Now, I have a couple things to say about this card, not the least of which is he looks like what would happen if Jake the Snake Roberts made a Monster Hunter character out of his own image. And you can thank my friend Steve for making me see and never be able to unsee Jake the Snake Roberts here in Cheville. If you don't understand that reference, he's a WrestleMan. Don't worry about it. But regardless, I think this card's really cool. This is the 3rd card ever to use bounty counters. Unfortunately, it's not a good combo with Methos, the Fiend Hunter, I think. Methos, Fiend Slayer? Methos, whatever. It'll show up over here. Because that's Mardu, and this is Golgari, and you're going to want to make one of these your commander. But it's really good with Bounty Hunter, a card from Tempest that I know you've forgotten about, but I haven't, because I used to play with it in casual games. I even played it in Commander once. It wasn't very good on its own, but now that it has a friend, it looks a little nicer. You can add more bounty counters to the mix. So that's pretty cool. Obviously, what you want to do is put bounty counters on stuff and then kill that stuff. So play a lot of removal, cycle through your removal, gain some life, draw some cards. Find some way to spend your life on something that you like. Like, I don't know, more cards maybe. That's always a fun trade-off. Next up, we have Dire Tactics, a white and black instant. Exile target creature. It's pretty good for the cost. If you don't control a human, you lose life equal to that creature's toughness. So kind of a spin on Vendetta, right? You're losing life equal to the toughness, but all you have to do is control a human. There's enough humans in this color combination that you might just incidentally have one. You might still just play this card because it exiles things unconditionally, or you might play it in a humans deck. Who knows? Maybe there's a lot of humans in this set fighting against the monsters or allying with the monsters. It's hard to say. There are a lot of humans in the set doing that. Next up, we have one of those humans, General Kudrow of Drannith. 1 a white and a black for a 3/3 legendary human soldier. Other humans you control get +1/+1. All right, an Anthem on your commander. That's pretty classic. Whenever General Kudrow of Drannith or another human enters the battlefield under your control. Ooh, getting excited. This is going to be a big payoff. Exile target creature from an opponent's graveyard. Okay, so maybe not the biggest payoff. Let's keep reading. Pay 2, sacrifice 2 humans, destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Okay, I kind of get the flavor, right? the humans are getting rid of monstrosities from the graveyard. They're trying to return order to the world. They team up to fight these big behemoths, right? But am I wrong, or is the Anthem the best part of this commander? And am I even more wrong, or is that not terribly inspiring? The Anthem effect is not enough for me. I would play Morophon or King Kenrith or even other things that don't synergize with the human tribe before I played this, and that's not a good sign for General Kudrow. Next up, we have General's Enforcer. Again, you know, another one of these humans I'm talking about. White and black for a 2/3 human soldier. Legendary humans you control have indestructible, so he's here to protect the general or any other legendary human. 2, a white and a black, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Now that's a lot to pay for kind of a knockoff of Necrogenesis or Scavenging Ooze. I feel like cards like Withered Wretch do this job a lot better of just surgically removing cards from graveyards. And you have access to that if you have access to General's Enforcer. I have seen people talk about something that would have high story equity, and that is combining this card with something like Arcane Adaptation or Xenograph or Conspiracy to make all your creatures human, and then play Leyline of Singularity to make them all legendary. Now, this seems ambitious. If you build a deck with all these things in it, it'll probably happen to you once in your lifetime if you play the deck 25 plus times. But that one time, gosh, that one time is going to be super sweet to the point where, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And you're not going to see the other 24 times, but you will see the video of the time I get to do it. And that is going to be worth it. Of course, I'm going to get blown out on the next turn, but I'm going to have done it. And I'll just, you know, throw my hands in the air and walk away from the table. Right now, I still don't have a green screen. I still just have this software, so my hands kind of phase in and out of reality when I do that along with my chair, but you get the idea. Next up, we have Labyrinth Raptor, black and a red for a 2/2 Nightmare Dinosaur. Great creature type, great art also. Darken has made this Labyrinth Raptor just go absolutely wild in this art. 2/2 Menace. Whenever a creature you control with Menace becomes blocked, defending player sacrifices a creature blocking it. That's interesting. And then a black and a red to give creatures you control with Menace +1/+0 until end of turn. If you're all in on Menace, which I didn't realize was a thing, I guess it is in this set, but it doesn't seem like it will be necessarily in Commander. That's cool, but like, I don't do a lot of blocking in Commander. Like, if you're blocking, then that means the game is nearing its end state, and you're probably, somebody's dying soon. Either you, the person who's attacking, somebody else. The game is winding down if there's a lot of blocking going on. And if you find yourself blocking a lot of Menace creatures, you're gonna die. So maybe this is for regular tournament constructed, but I don't know how much blocking we do there either these days. I don't block a lot, although I did play multiple matches of Temur Reclamation earlier today, so I guess I did block a couple of questing beasts with Uro the turn before I went off, but, you know, blocking's not huge. Next up, we have Primal Empathy. 1, a green and a blue for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card if you control a creature with the greatest power among creatures on the battlefield. Otherwise, okay, good, there's an otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. This reminds me of Colossal Majesty, but with harder requirements to hit, because you have to have the biggest thing or tied for the biggest thing. I would play Colossal Majesty before I played this, but I can see Primal Empathy having a spot in decks that are really looking to load up on these like Phyrexian Arena type effects for decks that want to go big. Just remember that Commander is a format where people tend to want to go big, and you might not be the person who's going the biggest. Next up, we have Skull Prophet, a card I'm really excited about. Black-green for a 3/1 human druid. Tap to add a black or green mana. Great in the early game. Tap to put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. That's huge. So if you need mana, you get mana. If you need self-mill, you got self-mill. Either way, both of these things are fuel for Reanimator-type decks, any kind of graveyard deck that you're trying to get together, and I think Skull Prophet is just going to be fantastic in a lot of these decks. It's a little weird that it's a 3/1 because it has 2 tap abilities. It's not going to see a lot of combat, because you're going to want to be doing... You're not attacking somebody with this. I can see rare cases where you need to hit a planeswalker with it, right? But most of the time, you're either making mana or you're milling yourself. So it's weird. The power is weird, but it's a pretty cool card. Fiend Artisan. 2 black-green hybrid mana for a 1/1 Nightmare. Okay, 2 mana, 1/1. But Fiend Artisan gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. So it's like a half of a Lurgoyf, right? It only looks at your graveyard, but you have the graveyard you can count on, right? Because you can fill up your graveyard with cards like, I don't know, Skull Prophet maybe? But it also has another really good ability. X and then a black-green hybrid mana. Tap, sacrifice another creature. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less. Put it onto the battlefield. Then shuffle your library. Activate this only at sorcery speed. So the first thing that you want to note is that you're not limited by the creature you're sacrificing. You're only limited by your available mana. So it's a little different from Birthing Pod type effects in that respect. And that means that you can be a lot more flexible with what kinds of cards you can tutor up. You do have to pay full price for them, but that's still pretty cool, right? You can turn a creature into another creature. Again, not in the same way as Birthing Pod or Vannifar, but you're still making that happen, and it's still very strong. It expands your options, but at the cost of more mana. I think this card's great. If you're interested in these pod type effects, which I know a lot of my friends are, I'm kind of lukewarm on them because they do feel like they make games kind of samey for me, but I know a lot of people have fun with them. I have no problem with these effects. Please play them against me. They're super cool. I'm very excited to see what people do with Fiend Artisan. Next up, we have Proud Wildbonder. 2 and 2 Gruul hybrid mana for a 4/3 human warrior with trample. Creatures you control with trample you may have this creature assign its combat damage as though it weren't blocked. So if you're familiar with Thorn Elemental, it's got that same ability, but it gives it to all your creatures with trample, which means this goes right in your Stonebrow Krosan hero deck. If you, like me, have a Stonebrow Krosan hero deck. I only have one on Magic Online, but I do have one, I promise. But this card's great if you're trampling over. You can even just knock players out of the game during the combat damage step. Just trample over for the whole thing. Now you'll still lose some of your creatures to blocking. It doesn't avoid that, but you get to avoid having to assign damage to their pointless creatures before you hit the face. That's pretty cool. This is going to go in my Godzilla King of the Monsters deck as well. I designed one of those for my Channel Fireball newsletter. I like it a lot. Very excited to actually put it together when the set comes out. Of course, you know, Godzilla King of the Monsters, that's definitely the name of the card. I just want to make sure. I don't remember the real name of the card, but I want to make sure we understand the card is called Godzilla King of the Monsters. Don't worry about other names. This card goes right in this deck. Next up, we have Crystalline Giant. So a 3/3 artifact creature giant for 3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, okay, so this happens the first turn it's in play, you choose a kind of counter at random that Crystalline Giant doesn't have from among flying, first strike, death touch, hexproof, lifelink, menace, reach, trample, vigilance, and +1/+1. Then you put a counter of that kind on Crystalline Giant. So given that it grows on your first turn, I think I would want to give it hexproof that first turn, right? Because you want it to be less interactable. And then you want to kind of grow its other abilities. Given that you can only give it 1 +1/+1 counter, I would focus on trying to build up its power and toughness in other ways. Moving counters from card to card is not easy right now. You don't have a lot of options. Leech Bondar is one of the best options, and that means that you don't have a lot of good options. So you want to focus on giving it a lot of abilities, maybe remove counters for value with a card like Soul Diviner or Power Conduit, but otherwise, by itself, this card is kind of cool, if a little unimpressive. Next up, we have the crystals. 1 for each of the 5 wedges here on Ikoria. So these non-allied 3-color wedges. I can't make a wedge with me. You understand. It's a wedge. It's like cons. It's like cons, not like shards. So they resemble the shards, mana rocks, the shards obelisks, or the banners from cons, but instead of having, like, being able to break them open to draw a card, or in the case of the obelisks, not having the ability to do that. They instead have cycling too. So whether you draw this in the early game and play it as a mana rock, or draw it in the late game and cycle it, these have value. Now, I'd rather play a Commander Sphere because you can play it in the early game, use it for mana, and then get the card when you need the card. But if you don't have access to Commander Sphere readily, or if you just need more 3-color mana rocks, these are great options. And if you can get extra value out of the cycle somehow, that's even better. Next up, we have Capella Gore, which would have gone earlier, except I decided to put some of the fun versions in. So let's look at these cool comic book versions. It says 5 and 2 blue for a 7/7 Leviathan. Mutate 5 and a blue. Whenever this creature mutates, tap up to X target creatures, where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step. So it's that last bit of text that really gives this card its value, really makes this. This is another like value upon value upon value mutate card, because what you want to do is make our Capella Gore's trigger happen turn after turn after turn. And again, as we've discussed many times, that comes with a risk of losing the whole pile at some point, which you will. Next up is Glowstone Recluse, 2 and a green for a 2/3 spider. Mutate 3 and a green. Reach. Whenever this creature mutates, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. If you're combining mutate and a counter theme, or if you're all in on Bracos commander damage, I can see this card being good. But otherwise, I don't know. Your creature's already going to be kind of big, as long as you have one of the big 5/5, 6/6, 7/7 mutates in the pile. I don't know, like there's a certain point at which your creature is just so big that who cares, unless it has evasion. So I suppose with one of the other commanders, with a Luna, it could be good, right? Because a Luna has flying, so I feel like Glowstone Recluse could shine there as well. In Luna or Bracos, as long as you're getting a hit with an evasive or recursive commander, trying to deal commander damage, something like that, I think Glowstone Recluse has a place. Reach exists too. Next up, Trumpeting Gnar. Toot toot. 1, a green and a blue for a 3/3 beast. Mutate 3 and 2 blue-green hybrid mana. Whenever this creature mutates, create a 3/3 green beast creature token. Now this I like because it leaves value behind, just like that 6/6 did from earlier. Obviously not as much value because you're only getting a 3/3 green beast, but still it leaves value behind. And if you have something like Doubling Season, it leaves even more value behind. Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, Anointed Procession if you somehow shoehorned white into your deck as well, although that would not be one of the wedges, so I feel like you'd probably not be playing a Bant Mutate deck. I admit that 1, a green and a blue for 3/3 related stuff does hit that button of like, uh-oh, Oko. But this card's not Oko. This card's totally fine. This card's fun, and you should play it. It's totally reasonable. And it makes 3/3 friends. Yay! Next up is a new friend who I love very much, and I'm pretty sure is very terrible. Yadara Wandering Monster. 5 and 2 red for an 8/8 trample haste dinosaur turtle. Now, okay, let's be clear. If you're looking to get people with commander damage, you could do a lot worse than 5 red for an 8/8 haste trampler. But being stuck in mono red when you're trying to do that, it's got its ups and its downs, but it's got cycling 1 and a red. So if you're not playing it as your commander, you could be cycling it. Whenever you cycle Yadara Wandering Monster, shuffle it into your library from your graveyard. If you've cycled a card named Yadara Wandering Monster 4 or more times this game, put it onto the battlefield from your graveyard instead. We only get to play 1 Yadara in this format, so you'd have to like tutor it up or naturally draw it again. There's a lot of work involved. You have to cycle it 4 times, which costs 8 mana. Now, admittedly, you draw some cards in that bargain, but if you're spending a lot of time and mana and cards tutoring up Yadara over and over again to cycle it, unless you're just really committed to seeing this adorable dinosaur friend, I suggest finding something better to do with your time and mana, honestly. But he's adorable. Look at him. Look at Yadara. I almost can't resist. We'll see. I'll probably play this card at some point. I do love me a good wandering monster. I did play a lot of Munchkin back in the day. Next up we have Kogla. Kogla? Who knows? The Titan Ape. 3 green for a 7/6 legendary ape. When Kogla enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. When it attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. And then 1 and a green, return target human you control to its owner's hand. Kogla gains indestructible until end of turn. Okay, so we've got kind of the King Kong who you know, steals a human and runs to the top of a crystal and fights these dirigibles or whatever, and then destroys artifacts and enchantments. Very, very King Kong. I liked the backstory they gave on Kogla online. I saw a tweet about that. It looked pretty cool. But this card does everything. It fights. It breaks stuff. It plays Temur Sabretooth with humans. This is all pretty cool. Give it haste and you can generate a ton of value on the first turn. The Temur Sabretooth ability being restricted to humans does limit your shenanigans ability, but it's still pretty cool. You're mostly going to use it to give Kogla indestructible, and maybe rebuy a couple of human-related triggers. Death's Oasis. White, black, green enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then, return a creature card with lesser converted mana cost than that creature that died from your graveyard to your hand. So it's like Scrap Trawler for creatures that also mills you. Only for non-tokens, that's important, but, you know, tokens don't usually have a converted mana cost, so that's fine. It also has 1, sacrifice Death's Oasis. You gain life equal to the greatest converted mana cost among creatures you control. So, if somebody's trying to exile Death's Oasis, mostly, you can sacrifice it and be like, no. I'm going to get this enchantment back from the graveyard eventually, don't you worry. But the most exciting part is that cool recursion ability that also mills you. I feel like there's a lot of, you know, shifting downward in creatures where you can go back down the ladder, get value from Enter the Battlefield cards, your Eternal Witnesses, your Yavimaya Elders, your Sakura Tribe Elders, cards that are small utility friends, but can really benefit from being played time and time again. I think there's a lot of value here. And then, of course, you could just bring back a bunch of creatures from the graveyard after you've milled yourself enough. I think this card's awesome. Can't wait to play with it. I hope to just go off on a single turn with Death's Oasis and just make somebody's life... Their life total is just going to be gone. That's what's going to happen at the end of the process, hopefully. And last but not least, a card not from Ikoria, but from Commander 2020. Arcane Cygnet. That's right, Arcane Cygnet, seen only in those Brawl decks, is finally back in all of the Commander 2020 decks, as far as I understand it. Hopefully that increases the supply on this card, because we're kind of all now forced to play this cool Felwar Stone variant if we want to optimize our decks. So it's like, you know, most lists are going to start with Sol Ring Arcane Cygnet. I don't love that personally. I was against Sol Ring for a long time. I've just sort of given up that campaign. I'm just like, all right, well, it's the only format we can play this darn card in other than Vintage, so let's just give up and let people play their thing. And so now I play Sol Ring 2 because, well, everybody plays it. I gotta have the potential for broken starts as well. And I feel the same way about Arcane Cygnet. I'd rather be in a world where we're forced to think about, well, am I playing Felwar Stone, Mind Stone, Thought Vessel, a card, by the way, that needs a reprint. Hello, please reprint Thought Vessel, help me. But Arcane Cygnet takes some of the interesting value of that away. And I prefer to have to make decisions during deck building. I think that's more interesting. All right, well, that's it for today. Please let me know how you enjoyed this, if you liked it, if you didn't like it. If you liked it, I want to hear about it in the comments. Please hit all the nice buttons that give me the social media endorphins that I so desperately crave in this digital age. If you didn't like it, I'm sure you can find somebody to complain to somewhere in your home that isn't me. Or realistically, you can give me constructive feedback. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Somehow I missed this Counterspell Shark when I was recording this video. I don't know how I missed Counterspell Shark. Voracious Great Shark. It's a 3 and 2 blue for a 5/4 flash shark. That's awesome. When Voracious Great Shark enters the battlefield, counter target artifact or creature spell. So it just eats your spell if it's a being or an object. That rules. It's just kind of like biting a boat in half. That's pretty rad. I mean, not for the people. If it's your boat or you're in it, I guess that's maybe terrible. But for the rest of us, casting the shark, that seems pretty cool. This card's rad. It's a fun alternative to cards like Draining Welk, Frilled Mystic, Mystic Snake, or a fun addition to those cards. I think this card's awesome, both in flavor and in execution. I expect to see it a lot, especially because you get not just the counter, but the 5/4 body, which is a big improvement on Mystic Snake, Frilled Mystic, and sometimes even on Draining Welk, but not usually. But realistically, for 5 mana, this is a great deal. Okay, I'm out. See you next time.